Everyone in the crowd thought this would be the day my family got dragged away in handcuffs. Phones were out, faces eager. Some even brought coffee like they were settling in for a morning show. Only one person smiled brighter than the rest. The woman who had orchestrated the entire spectacle. Our HOA president, Karen Walsh. But Karen had no idea that the quiet family she'd been hunting for months wasn't quite what we appeared to be. To understand how we got here, I have to take you back to the morning it all began. It was one of those perfect Saturdays, warm light spilling across trimmed lawns, the sound of sprinklers ticking like clockwork, and the faint smell of coffee drifting from open kitchen windows. My father, Frank Miller, was exactly where you'd expect him to be at 7 a.m., out in the garden, watering his roses with the same devotion some men reserve for church. He'd spent 30 years in what he vaguely called government work, a phrase neighbors never pushed him to explain. Retired now at 68, he'd earned his peace. I was just pulling into the driveway after another business trip. That's what everyone thought I did for a living. John Miller, business consultant, the kind of job title vague enough to keep questions at bay. My 12-year-old son, Sam, was probably at the kitchen table wrestling with weekend homework and wondering why Dad always seemed to be coming or going. From the outside, we were exactly what we needed to be. A normal, suburban family, retired grandpa, hard-working single dad, smart kid, quiet life. Then she appeared. Karen Walsh, moving across our lawn like a storm front, clipboard in hand. There was a precision in her step, a purpose in her eyes. She wasn't here to talk about the weather. She wasn't here to borrow sugar. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her designer athletic wear practically shouting that she had both the time and the money to make other people's lives miserable. She didn't bother with small talk. "I'm Karen Walsh, HOA president for 5 years running. We need to discuss serious property violations." Her voice carried, intentionally, and I could see blinds shift as neighbors peeked out to watch. She pulled out a measuring tape like it was a sidearm. "Your grass is 3.2 inches high. Our standard is 3.0. That's a $200 fine." She didn't stop. "Your vehicle was parked 2.1 inches beyond the driveway boundary last night between 6 and 8 p.m. That's another $150. And this garden gnome violates our aesthetic guidelines. $100 fine." I glanced at Dad. 30 years in government service had taught him how to deal with difficult people. But as she rattled off her list, something shifted in his expression. Not anger, not frustration, something else. When she turned, her attention to Sam, leaning down with that patronizing smile, the air seemed to tighten. "Young man, your grandfather needs to understand that community standards apply to everyone." Sam, with the honesty only a 12-year-old can muster, replied, "Grandpa always follows rules. He used to work for the government catching people who broke really important ones, not grass rules." That's when I saw it. A flicker in Karen's eyes, like she'd just discovered buried treasure. "Government work? How fascinating. What kind of work exactly?" Her tone wasn't neighborly curiosity. It was interrogation. Later, behind closed doors, Dad told me what I'd never expected to hear. "That woman isn't just a difficult neighbor. Her real name is Linda Ross. 25 years ago, I arrested her for money laundering. She swore she'd make me pay. And just like that, the peaceful life we'd built began to unravel. Most people, when faced with a petty HOA fine, roll their eyes, maybe grumble, and pay it just to keep the peace. But when my father told me who Karen really was, the fines became the least of my concerns. I stared at him, trying to connect the dots. "Linda Ross," he repeated quietly, almost as if saying her name might summon her. 15 years in federal prison. She embezzled $2 million from children's medical research charities. Families lost their kids because funding vanished into her accounts. I was the FBI agent who put her away. The words landed like a gut punch. This wasn't just an overzealous neighbor enforcing lawn rules. This was a convicted criminal with a grudge older than I was as an adult, a grudge she'd been feeding for decades. I didn't say anything right away. I was processing, trying to keep my own secrets tucked in their place. But the truth has a way of clawing its way out. Dad. Since we're being honest, I'm not actually a business consultant. I reached into my wallet and slid my credentials across the table. Special Agent John Miller, FBI, Financial Crimes Division. 8 years active service. The pride on Dad's face was instant but tangled with something else. Concern. John, if you're federal, she'll figure it out. Linda never left anything to chance. Sam, wide-eyed, looked between us like he'd just stumbled into the middle of a spy movie. So, you're both good guys who catch bad guys. Why are we letting the bad guy lady bother us? Dad smiled faintly at the simplicity of the question. Sometimes, Sam, you have to let people show their hand before you make a move. Patience wins wars. But patience wasn't exactly Karen's style. The very next morning, she showed up again. Only this time, she brought reinforcements. 2. Neighbors flanked her like reluctant bodyguards. Tom from 3 houses down and Jennifer from the corner. Both looked like they'd been roped into something they didn't want any part of. Mr. Miller, Karen began, her voice raised just enough for the whole block to hear. I've been researching your son's business. No license, no registered operation. Yet you live in an expensive home and travel frequently. Very concerning for community safety. She was planting seeds she intended to water until they strangled us. Tom shifted awkwardly, muttering something about just wanting to understand. Jennifer's eyes darted toward her driveway like she was calculating the fastest escape route. Karen, however, was in her element. Irregular work schedules, expensive vehicles, secretive employment details, red flags. We can't ignore them. I'd had enough. Ma'am, you're harassing my family over made-up violations. This stops now. Her lips curved into a smile that made my skin crawl. Are you threatening me? I'll contact the authorities. Perfect. Ma'am, I am the authorities. I pulled my badge from my pocket and held it where she, and the neighbors, could see it. Special Agent John Miller, FBI. The effect was immediate. Tom's mouth dropped open. Jennifer actually stepped back. And Karen's smile didn't fade. If anything, it sharpened. That badge could be fake, she said smoothly, but the faint tremor in her voice betrayed her. Anyone can make something look official these days. I gave her my badge number, my supervisor's name, the Quantico, field office. She had all she needed to verify it, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She wasn't shocked. She was pleased. Like she'd just confirmed something she'd been hoping was true. If you really are FBI Agent Miller, she said, lowering her voice so only I could hear, then you have no idea who you're dealing with. She turned and walked away, heels clicking on the sidewalk like a countdown. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in public manipulation. By sunrise the next morning, the neighborhood's social media group was flooded with her posts. Community. Alert. Family on Maple Street claims FBI status to intimidate neighbors. Real agents don't harass civilians over property issues. She attached photos of my car, time-stamped logs of my supposed suspicious activity, even charts, actual charts, of my travel patterns. Some neighbors defended us. Others questioned why I'd reveal my identity over lawn disputes. And just like that, our peaceful block split into 2 camps. Team Karen and Team Miller. That afternoon, I made the mistake of running errands with Sam. We'd just grabbed pancake mix at the grocery store when her voice cut through the aisle. That's him, the fake federal agent using intimidation to avoid community responsibilities. Every head turned. The store manager approached, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Sir, ma'am, can we lower our voices? Karen's chin lifted. Do you know who I am? I'm the elected HOA president. I demand you refuse service to people impersonating government officials. Phones came out. People began filming. Sam's grip tightened on my arm. Dad, why is she doing this? How do you explain to a 12-year-old that some people never outgrow the need to burn others just to feel powerful? Later that same day, she doubled down at a local coffee shop, loudly warning patrons about criminal intimidation while passing around printed copies of her social media posts like campaign flyers. That night, she called an emergency HOA meeting. 14 neighbors crowded into Betty's living room. Karen's presentation could have passed for a courtroom exhibit. Slides, photos, schedules. She painted us as dangerous frauds hiding behind fake badges. And the worst part? Some people believed her. Betty tried to inject reason. Maybe we should verify the facts before making accusations. Karen didn't miss a beat. Betty, they've probably intimidated you too. This is how criminal operations work. They make good people afraid to speak up. But Karen underestimated one thing. Sam. Kids are invisible when adults are talking. And that night, my son heard her say something that made my blood run cold. Phase 2 starts once they're gone. Then I can take full control of the neighborhood. This wasn't just personal revenge, it was a power grab, and we were in the way. The recording Sam made that night was short, grainy, but damning. Karen's voice was sharp, dripping with ambition. Once I expose this fake FBI family, I can implement the new fee structure and really take control of this neighborhood. Miller's influence has to go. New leadership is coming. It wasn't justice she was chasing. It was dominance. The next morning, I found Dad in his study, staring at an old case file I'd never seen before. The paper was yellowed at the edges. The photos inside faded but unmistakable. Linda Ross in a courtroom, sitting stone-faced, while a younger Frank Miller testified. I thought prison might change her, he said quietly. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd realize that stealing from sick children was a line you don't come back from, but all prison did was give her time to plan. His hands rested on the file, knuckles pale. John, she's not just trying to humiliate us. She's building something bigger, and we're just the first step. I knew he was right. By Monday morning, Karen's campaign had evolved. It wasn't just neighborhood gossip anymore. She'd gone to the local news. The email chain landed in my lap, courtesy of a sympathetic neighbor at the station. I have an important story about individuals using false government credentials to threaten law-abiding citizens. This affects public trust in our institutions. The story aired that same evening. Karen sat in front of the camera in a conservative blouse, speaking with calm authority, positioning herself as the heroic whistleblower protecting her community. If they'll lie about being FBI, what else are they lying about? She asked, letting the question hang in the air like a noose. Not a single word about her criminal past. No hint of the 15 years she'd spent in prison. By the end of the broadcast, the damage was done. Half the town had seen it, and the comments online were already a battlefield. Some praised her courage. Others wondered why an FBI agent would reveal his identity over a grass-height dispute. Either way, the division was deepening. Betty called that night. John, I've lived here 8 years. Karen's always been intense, but this is different. Some people are starting to ask if you're dangerous. Tom, the same neighbor who'd borrowed my jumper cables last winter, had apparently asked Betty that very question. 2 nights later came the meeting that felt more like a trial. 15 neighbors crammed into Betty's living room, eyes darting, tension thick enough to taste. Karen clicked through her slideshow with the precision of a prosecutor. Irregular schedules, multiple vehicles, no registered business license. Friends and neighbors, she began, her tone the kind that dared you to interrupt. We are facing a situation that threatens the safety and integrity of our community. The Miller family has been operating under false pretenses. They've used fabricated credentials to intimidate residents and avoid accountability. Every photo, every fact was designed to point in one direction, that we were the danger. She saved her favorite line for last. I've contacted federal authorities. If John Miller is really FBI, they'll confirm it. If he's not... She let the silence finish the sentence for her. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked uneasy. Betty tried again to stop the spiral. Karen, maybe we should wait for official confirmation before making serious accusations. Karen didn't blink. Betty, that's exactly the kind of thinking criminals count on. Politeness, hesitation. How many of you have noticed unusual behavior but stayed silent? Hands rose. Too many hands. Meanwhile, Sam had been sitting quietly near the doorway, pretending to scroll on his phone. He wasn't scrolling, he was recording. And when we got home, he told me what he'd overheard, as Karen stepped outside to make a call. Dad, she said she's going to make sure this goes national. That she wants everyone in law enforcement to know what kind of agents the FBI really hires. It clicked then. She wasn't just after our neighborhood reputation. She wanted to destroy our careers, rip away our security clearances, cut us off from the only work we'd ever known. And the worst part? She had the patience to do it. That night, Dad stared out the window at Karen's porch. She was still on the phone well past midnight, pacing like a general before battle. She's calling in favors, he murmured, activating whatever network she's built since getting out. The woman spent 25 years planning for this, and I don't think she's even close to done. When the police came later that week, it wasn't because they'd decided to investigate her, it was because she'd summoned them, with maximum backup. 3 patrol cars pulled onto our street, lights flashing, neighbors rushing outside with their phones ready. Karen was already in position, folder of evidence in hand, smiling like she'd won. Officers, thank you for coming. The suspects are inside that house. I have documented proof of their federal impersonation and intimidation. Her voice carried, and I could feel the crowd leaning forward in anticipation. That's when Dad did something none of them expected. He didn't wait for the officers to knock. He stepped outside, credentials in hand, moving with the calm certainty of a man who had nothing to hide and a lifetime of service behind him. The crowd went quiet the second Dad stepped onto the porch. It wasn't fear that silenced them. It was the sheer, unshakable composure in his movements. He wore his pressed khakis, his polo shirt tucked in, every inch the image of a man who had nothing to prove, but everything to protect. His gaze locked on the lead officer, a tall man with sun-creased skin and a practiced air of neutrality. "Good morning, officer," Dad said, extending a weathered leather wallet. "I understand there's been some confusion about my family's background." The officer flipped open the credentials. His expression shifted in slow motion, skepticism giving way to recognition. Victor Frank Miller, Senior Special Agent, FBI Financial Crimes Division, retired with full honors. He looked up, his voice carrying enough weight to turn heads. "The Frank Miller? The closer? Sir, your cases are taught at the academy." Ripple moved through the crowd, whispers, a couple of startled gasps. Cameras tilted toward Dad now, not Karen. Her smile twitched, but she wasn't ready to give up the spotlight. "Documents can be forged. Anyone can make themselves look important with enough fancy paper." That's when I stepped outside. I kept my steps even, my posture calm. "Officer Davis," I said, my own leather badge holder in hand. "Special Agent John Miller, FBI Financial Crimes Division, currently active duty, badge number 4472, Direct Supervisor, Agent Helen Collins, Quantico Field Office." He checked it, as methodical as before. "Looks current to me." His gaze flicked between Karen and the crowd. "Ma'am, you called law enforcement to report that federal agents were impersonating federal agents." The absurdity hung there, for a beat before sinking in. I could see it in the neighbor's eyes. The slow realization that they'd been roped into a narrative that made no sense. But Dad wasn't done. He stepped forward, his voice steady as stone. Officer Davis. This woman's legal name is Linda Ross. 25 years ago, I investigated her money laundering operation. She stole $2 million from children's medical research charities. She was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The silence was suffocating. You could hear the wind through the maple trees. Linda, let out a sound that was part snarl, part wounded cry. 15 years you took from me. Every day in that prison I planned for this moment. I researched you. I found your family. I moved here to make you pay. The neighbors stumbled backward as if her confession had sent a physical shock through them. Betty's hand went to her mouth. Tom actually took a step behind someone taller. Davis reached for his radio. Ma'am, you are under arrest for harassment of federal officers, filing false police reports, and violating federal parole. But even with his hand on her arm, she wasn't finished. Her voice dropped into a venomous rhythm, meant for Dad's ears alone but loud enough to carry. You think you've won? You think 25 years of planning ends with handcuffs? She turned to the crowd, gesturing with the sweep of a stage performer. All of you were my weapons. I made you trust me. I made you elect me. I made you turn against him. Neighbors exchanged glances filled with shame. Betty's eyes glistened. Frank, we had no idea. They led Linda toward the patrol car, her heels grinding into the pavement. But before ducking into the back seat, she twisted just enough to send one final shot over her shoulder. Did you ever wonder why I chose this neighborhood? This exact house? For the first time since this began, Dad's confidence faltered. His jaw tightened. The door shut. The car pulled away. And yet, the silence she left behind didn't feel like peace. It felt like an unfinished sentence. Inside, the house was still, but not calm. Dad sat at the kitchen table staring at his credentials as if they'd suddenly turned into something fragile. Outside, neighbors began drifting home, their voices low, their eyes avoiding ours. The tide had turned, but it hadn't gone out completely. That night, I couldn't shake the image of her smile through the patrol car window. It wasn't the look of someone defeated. It was the look of someone who'd just moved to the next phase of their plan. The morning after Linda's arrest felt like a neighborhood waking from a bad dream. Neighbors who had been lined up to film our humiliation now lingered on the sidewalk, glancing toward our house with hesitant guilt. Betty crossed the street first, her hands twisting in front of her like she wasn't sure she had the right to stand there. Frank, she said softly, I feel like such a fool. She played us all, didn't she? One by one, others came. Apologies spilled out in awkward fragments. We didn't know. She seemed so convincing. I thought she was looking out for us. Tom, who had dragged out a folding chair to watch our supposed arrest, couldn't meet my eyes. She had us convinced you were the problem. I don't know how we missed it. Dad handled it with the same patience that had made him a legend in the Bureau. Folks, Linda Ross is good at what she does. She spent 15 years in prison studying exactly how to manipulate communities like ours. Nobody here is stupid. You were targeted. It was like watching a group of people piece together a puzzle they didn't know they'd been building. The edges were ugly, but the picture was clear now. Over the next few days, law enforcement dug into Linda's activities since her release. The picture only got worse. She had orchestrated HOA scams in 4 different states, preying on elderly, residents and families who trusted their community leaders. 52 families had lost money, nearly $900,000 in total, laundered through fake improvement projects and padded contractor invoices. The FBI coordinated across multiple field offices. Funds were traced, accounts frozen, associates picked up. My own division handled part of the recovery process, which felt personal. Every dollar we clawed back was a little piece of her power stripped away. But the neighborhood damage was harder to repair. Betty organized what she called a healing meeting at the community center. 23 people showed up, some still shaken by how close they'd come to destroying my family's life. She asked me about your work schedule every time we spoke, one neighbor admitted. I thought she was just making conversation. Another confessed. She offered to lower my HOA fees if I kept an eye on your house and reported anything suspicious. The worst came from Mrs. Henderson, an elderly widow 2 streets over. She convinced me to give her my bank account information for automatic HOA payments. I didn't realize she was taking more than the fees. She stole thousands from me. Dad's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. That's why she targeted communities. People want to believe their leaders are acting in good faith. She exploited that trust for profit and revenge. If there was one silver lining, it was Sam. My son, the quiet observer, had become the neighborhood's unlikely hero. Dad even called him Agent Sam when he told the group how crucial his overheard recordings had been. Sam beamed under the attention, but I could see the weight of it too, the awareness that he'd been part of something dangerous. 3 months later, the court came down hard. Linda Ross, or Karen Walsh to the HOA world, was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for fraud, money laundering, parole violations, and harassment of federal officers. The judge's words were blunt. Your manipulation of an entire community to facilitate personal revenge shows a level of planning that demands the maximum sentence. $890,000 was recovered and returned to victims. Her 3 known associates got between 5 and 12 years each. Betty was elected the new HOA president in a unanimous vote. One of her first acts was to dismantle the punitive fine system Linda had used to control people. The focus shifted to genuine community building, block parties, shared projects, volunteer cleanups. The change was immediate. The atmosphere on Maple Street was lighter, friendlier. Dad found a new purpose, giving security workshops to other neighborhoods. Financial predators target communities with strong social bonds, he told them. They count on our reluctance to question authority. 6 months in, our own street had transformed. The community garden Dad had always dreamed of was thriving, with neighbors pitching in soil, plants, and time. Sam was doing better than ever in school. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we'd put the whole thing behind us. Then the letter arrived. It was waiting in our mailbox in a plain envelope, postmarked from a federal correctional facility. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No threats, no rants, just a few lines, written in Linda's tight, deliberate script. The neighborhood was never random. Frank, check your basement. Some games take longer to finish than others. Dad sat at the kitchen table, staring at it, the color gone from his face. John, he said finally, in 30 years of law enforcement, I learned to trust my instincts about when a case is really closed. This doesn't feel closed. Sam walked in from school a few minutes later, sensing the tension instantly. What's wrong? Dad didn't look away from the paper. Sam, I think you need to call your father right now. The walls of our house, the one place we'd felt safe, suddenly felt smaller, tighter, and in the back of my mind I could see her face in that patrol car, smiling like the game had never ended. The letter sat in the center of the table like it had a pulse. Dad hadn't moved since he'd read it aloud, his fingertips still resting on the edge of the paper as if letting go might make it more real. The neighborhood was never random. Frank, check your basement. Some games take longer to finish than others. The words carried weight, not just in what they said, but in what they didn't. I took the letter from him, reading it again. This time with the eyes of an investigator, not a son. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, no tremor, no rush. Linda had written this knowing exactly how it would be received. "She's still in prison," I said, though it sounded more like a question. Dad shook his head slowly. "She's in prison physically. But Linda Ross never played one-dimensional games. She always had layers, contingency plans. This is one of them." Sam was standing in the doorway now, his backpack still slung over one shoulder. "What's in the basement?" I forced my voice to stay calm. "Nothing. Probably nothing, but we're going to check anyway." It was the middle of the afternoon, sunlight spilling through the living room windows. Still, as we descended the basement steps, it felt like the air got colder. Dad flicked the light switch, and the familiar hum of the old fixture buzzed above us. Nothing looked out of place at first. Boxes of holiday decorations, old furniture draped in sheets, my high school trophies collecting dust in a corner. Then I noticed something. Near the back wall, behind a stack of crates, the concrete floor had a faint discoloration. A square. Patch about 4 feet by 4 feet that didn't quite match the rest. "Dad," I said, nodding toward it. He joined me, kneeling to run his fingers across the surface. "This patch is newer than the rest of the slab." He stood slowly. "John, this wasn't here when I bought the house." The air seemed to thicken. I grabbed a crowbar from the workbench and began shifting the crates aside. Dad didn't stop me. The patch was solid, too solid to crack easily without tools we didn't have on hand. I could almost hear Linda's voice in my head, taunting. "Some games take longer to finish than others." "Whatever's under here," Dad said finally. "It's not something we deal with alone. We call this in." By evening, the basement was crawling with people I knew on a first-name basis from the Bureau. Evidence teams, a forensics specialist, even a structural engineer. Sam watched from the stairs, wide-eyed, while I stayed close, to Dad. They cut through the concrete in careful sections, the sound of the drill echoing through the house. The dust clung to the air, coating everything in a thin gray film. When the first piece came loose, the smell hit, stale, chemical, metallic. A black plastic container emerged from the cavity, heavy, sealed tight with industrial tape. No one spoke as the lead tech sliced it open. Inside were stacks of manila envelopes, each labeled with a different address, all in our neighborhood. Each envelope held photographs, financial statements, personal letters, the kind of information you only collect when you're building leverage over someone. Linda hadn't just been watching us. She'd been watching everyone. One envelope had our name on it. Inside were copies of Dad's old case files, ones that weren't public record. Along with them, a set of photographs taken through our own windows. Dad's hands clenched at his sides. She had someone on the inside. Someone here helped her plant this. The room was suddenly too small, too quiet. The weight of what we'd found wasn't just about the evidence. It was about the message. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Later that night, after the team packed up the evidence, Dad and I sat in the living room. Neither of us touched the coffee that had gone. Cold in our mugs, Sam had fallen asleep on the couch, unaware of how deep this was about to go. "John," Dad said quietly. "She's telling us she still has reach. If she could arrange this while living next door under an alias, prison walls won't stop her. Now." I nodded slowly. "Then we need to figure out who's still playing her game. Because if Linda had accomplices in the neighborhood, people still loyal, still willing, we weren't dealing with a past threat. We were living in the middle of an active one. We didn't sleep that night. The discovery in the basement had shifted everything. Before, Linda was a threat contained behind prison walls. Now, she was a spider with threads still stretching into our lives, her web anchored right under our feet. By morning, I had a full team assigned to the case. Not just because it was personal, but because what we'd found in that black container was bigger than a vendetta. It was a blueprint for control. Every envelope was a dossier on someone in the neighborhood. Debts they hadn't told anyone. About affairs they thought were secret, investments gone bad, even medical diagnoses they'd kept private. Linda had been running a long-term surveillance operation, gathering enough leverage to pull any string she wanted, and someone here had helped her bury that evidence in our home. The first question was obvious. Who? Dad and I walked the neighborhood together that afternoon, stopping to talk to people we trusted, or at least thought we could. Some neighbors avoided eye contact entirely. Others overcompensated, their friendliness brittle, their smiles too wide. Betty was different. She invited us in without hesitation, poured coffee, and listened as I explained what we'd found. Her eyes darkened with every word. John. If she had help, it had to be someone she'd already compromised. Someone she could threaten into cooperating. That's what worries me, I said. If she has that kind of leverage, they might still be working for her. Betty set her mug down hard. Then you need to find them before she uses them again. That evening, I reviewed the contents of the container in detail. Each dossier was meticulous. Dates, times, photos, annotated maps of the neighborhood. But one stood out. It belonged to Tom, the neighbor who had been so quick to join Karen's little porch posse the day she confronted us. His file included gambling debts that stretched back years, debts to people I recognized from organized crime cases. I didn't want to believe it, but the math was simple. Tom had motive to keep Linda happy. The next day, I paid him a visit. He opened the door with a forced grin, the kind you use when you know you're cornered. Agent Miller, what can I do for you? You can start by telling me how that container ended up under my basement floor. His eyes flicked. Just for a moment, toward the end of the street, where Karen's old house sat dark and empty. Then he tried to bluff. No idea what you're talking about. Tom, I have photos, I said, keeping my tone level. Security cam stills from you. The night the patch in my basement was poured. You're in them. Now, you can tell me the truth here, or we can have this conversation in an interrogation room. He deflated like a punctured tire. She said it was just paperwork. Said she needed to hide it in case the HOA got audited. I didn't know what was really in there. I studied him for a long moment. And when she went to prison? He swallowed hard. She told me to keep my head down and wait, that someone would come by with instructions. The words landed heavy. Someone. Which meant the network wasn't broken. It was waiting. That night, Dad and I compared notes. She's still running things from the inside, he said grimly. She's done it before. She'll do it again. I thought about Sam, sleeping upstairs, blissfully unaware that the woman who'd tried to destroy us was still pulling strings. Then we find every last one of those strings and cut them. But even as I said it, I knew we weren't just hunting ghosts. Whoever someone was, they were here, walking these same streets, waving the same friendly hellos. And until we found them, we'd be living in a neighborhood where every smile might hide a trap. The next week was a blur of quiet moves and careful listening. We couldn't alert the neighborhood to what we were doing. If Linda's network suspected we were onto them, they'd go to ground, and we'd lose our chance to cut every wire. So Dad and I played the part of ordinary residents again, watering plants, waving at joggers, making polite small talk. All the while, our eyes and ears were tuned for the slip-ups that always come when people think they're safe. Tom was easy to watch. Guilt made him clumsy. But it was Jennifer, the neighbor from the corner, who gave herself away. She'd been distant during the height of Karen's crusade, and afterward, she'd avoided me completely. Then one afternoon, I saw her slip an envelope into Tom's mailbox. The stakeout that followed wasn't glamorous, 3 hours in an unmarked SUV watching from behind tinted glass, but when Tom retrieved the envelope, opened it, and immediately made a call from his porch, I knew we had our thread. The Bureau's tech team traced the call. It didn't go to a family member or a local business. It went to a prepaid cell inside the federal prison where Linda Ross was serving her sentence. That was our proof. The next 48 hours were a coordinated sweep. Warrants came through just before dawn. Tom's home was searched, revealing more envelopes, more instructions in Linda's hand. Jennifer's house turned up financial transfers from accounts tied to Linda's previous scams, payments for community services. That didn't exist. By noon, both were in custody. And when they realized the evidence we had, the whole rotten structure came down fast. Jennifer folded first, describing late-night meetings with Linda before her arrest, strategy sessions about community influence, and eliminating obstacles. Tom, desperate to save himself, admitted he'd been the one to help plant the black container in our basement, and that there were other caches in other states hidden in homes near Linda's targets. It was bigger than we thought. Next month, Linda's so-called HOA network unraveled. We found 5 more complicit HOA presidents across 3 states, all running variations of her scam, manufactured violations, inflated fees, and carefully crafted campaigns to remove anyone who stood in their way. The total fraud climbed past $2 million. Linda herself was transferred to a higher security facility and placed in solitary confinement while the case expanded. When the news broke, it wasn't just a local headline. It made national coverage. The day after the final arrests, Dad and I walked the street together. The air felt lighter than it had in months. Neighbors waved with something closer to genuine warmth now, and Betty had already put up flyers for a block party. No agendas, just food. Still, as we reached our driveway, Dad's gaze lingered. On Karen's old house. 18 years, he said. Maybe more now. But she's not the kind to fade quietly. I knew he was right. You don't spend 25 years plotting revenge and just stop. That night, after Sam went to bed, I sat in the quiet of the living room, thinking about what this had all meant. Linda's biggest weapon had never been her scams or her fines. It was her ability to turn good people into tools without them even realizing it. Communities are built on trust. She'd turned that into a weapon, but she'd also taught us something. And maybe it was the one thing she hadn't planned for. Our neighborhood, fractured and suspicious just weeks ago, had been forced to look hard at itself. And what came out of that was stronger than anything an HOA charter could write. A genuine bond. When I finally went upstairs, Dad was in his study, looking over old case notes. He didn't glance up as I leaned against the doorframe. You think, she's really done? I asked. He closed the file, finally meeting my eyes. No, but the difference is, next time she moves, we'll see her coming. Outside, the street was quiet. Peaceful, but I knew, and so did Dad, that somewhere in a concrete cell, Linda Ross was already thinking about the next move, because in neighborhoods like ours, the real game never truly ends. You've heard this confession. Now wait until you hear the next one.